Well, hi there, Social Studies 20-1 here. What I'm going to do today is give you a tutorial, a lesson on how to write a position paper. We're actually going to do one next week in class, and so I want to, or I should say this week in class, I'm recording this the week before. I just want to give you the layout of a position paper, what goes into it, things that a marker is going to look for, and I'll help you with brainstorming, I'll help you with interpretation, I'll help you with everything concerning the position paper. So the first thing I'll point out is that in high school and social studies in Alberta, um, it's always going to look something like this. So whether you're writing the Social Studies 20-1 position paper or the diploma exam position paper next year in grade 12, the format is going to look exactly like you should be seeing on your screen right now. The only thing that'll be different is going to be the source. So the source is the one thing that will change in a position paper. So in grade 11, it's going to concern nationalism. In grade 12, it'll be about liberalism and democracy. But everything else will be exactly the same. Um, this wording will be the same, except nationalism will be replaced by liberalism, but everything else is going to look the same. I'd like you to pay attention to the top. They're suggesting the position paper takes about an hour and a half. That's in an ideal setting. I would think that this is probably something that should take about 3 hours of work at least, and maybe even more. So the first position paper we're going to kind of do, I'll get you going together, and it'll actually, like I said, it'll culminate next week. So that's what it's going to look like when you get your position paper assignment or written exam. This, by the way, is known as assignment 2. Assignment 1 is the source analysis. I think you know that. Assignment 2 is the position paper. Next year in grade 12, you'll have to do both exams in one sitting. Assignment 1 and assignment number 2 within one sitting next year when you write the grade 12 diploma. Next thing I'll point out is what goes into a position paper, the bird's eye view, the bird's eye format of a position paper. So what we're looking at is at minimum, you need 5 paragraphs. Now you can have more, that's fine. If you've got a good command of the English language and you feel confident about this, you can write it in more than 5 paragraphs, of course, but you have to have at least 5 paragraphs is what I'm trying to say. So I've divided the position paper up into 3 parts. Part 1 involves the introduction. Well, it is the introduction when we look at part 1. And so what you do in part 1 is you take a look at that source. So think back to the source I showed you. You need to comment and interpret that source. You're going to comment on and interpret that source. I'll help you with that specifically in a few minutes. But that's your first step when you put together the intro. Interpret and comment on the perspective in the source, and you're relating it to nationalism. So that source might be in favor of nationalism. That source might be dead set against nationalism. So you're going to interpret it, and you're going to say, this source is saying this about nationalism, or this source is saying this about nationalism. It's not as in depth as the source interpretations we do every day in class. This will be more of a general overview interpretation of what the source is saying. And the source will be simple and straightforward. Nothing to the degree that we do in class on the source interpretation. That's a different assignment. Next thing you do, and I'm just going through the bullets, you identify the challenge or dilemma or conflict raised by, this should say by, the source. And so what I mean by that is the source is going to raise an issue. Should we pursue nationalism? To what degree should nations pursue nationalism? That's the dilemma that you need to point out. Third bullet, you examine the different points of view. And here's where you basically say, the source is correct in its insinuation that blah, blah, blah. And here's why. Or the source is incorrect in its insinuation that blah, blah, blah. And here's why. So in other words, why would someone agree with the source? Why would someone disagree with the source? You want to be objective. And this is very critical in social studies. A position paper is an objective exploration of an issue using history, evidence, and so on. And so what I mean by that is that you are obviously going to take your stand on the source and you're going to attack it. You'll either support the source or you'll say, no, the source is wrong. But you have to at least consider that there is another side other than just yours. And that's what I mean by objectivity. You've got to recognize that there are probably good reasons for the source saying what it says, even though you might disagree with the source. You've got to be objective. Finally, toward the end of your intro, you're going to unveil your thesis. This is what you think about the source. After examining history, this paper will, state that blah, blah, blah about the source. So in the thesis, you either agree with the source or you disagree with the source, or maybe you partially agree with the source. That is your thesis statement, and it's critical. It might be the most important piece of your paper in that it states what you're going to argue during the rest of your paper. So your thesis should be clear, it should be direct, simple, and concise because the marker can't mark your paper unless they know what it is you're going to be arguing about. And you'll unveil that in your thesis. And at the end of your intro as well, you might briefly introduce your three main arguments, but you're not going to go into a lot of detail yet. A really good intro is at least a half a page typed, single spaced in a 12-point font. And I'll show you some samples coming up in a few minutes here. So if your intro is 4 lines long, that is not a good intro. You haven't done enough. You're off to a bad start already. By the way, here's the rubric for the position paper. It's actually for a mark out of 30. So the source analysis is out of 20. Position paper is out of 30. Your analysis of the source is your introduction, basically. And it's for a mark out of 6 on the position paper. So that's what I mean is you want to have at least a half a page, maybe even more, to get that mark to a 4.5 or a 6 out of 6. This rubric will be on D2L as well, so you can download it and maybe even have it with you while you're writing. But if you want to be scoring, proficient or excellent on the analysis, you've got to have a good intro that does a good job in dissecting the source and unveiling your thesis and so on. So if we go back to our overview, last comment I'll make about the intro, the thesis should come toward the end of the intro. If the thesis is the first sentence of the intro, you haven't been objective. You need to examine the issue thoroughly from, different points of view, and then you settle on your position. And by points of view, I mean someone might be extremely in favor of the source or someone might be moderately in favor of the source. What are the different points of view? Why would someone agree with the source? Why would they disagree? Why would they maybe kind of agree with the source? And the last comment I'll make, I know I said that once already, avoid using personal pronouns in a position paper. Don't use the word I or we or me or you. You want to be objective, so you want to speak third person. History has shown, historical evidence demonstrates. Don't use phrases like I think or you will see. They don't sound right. You haven't been objective when you use pronouns like that. That's the intro. Second part of the position paper is the body. And this is where your argument and evidence are going to be found. So an argument, and I'll show you some examples, but an argument is your topic sentence. It's clear, it's direct. History has demonstrated that nationalism always culminates in genocide. That could be a topic sentence. And then you would support that topic sentence with at least 2, but 3 examples would be better. My recommendation in history, and you've heard this before, is you want 3 examples demonstrating historical evidence because 1 or 2 could just be coincidences. If you've got 3, you've got a pattern, you found a trend. Your argumentation would be irrefutable. So once again, in the body, you're going to have 3 arguments. Argument number 1 will be a topic sentence. History has demonstrated that genocide always culminates from nationalism. That could be a topic sentence, an argument. And then you're going to have 3 pieces of evidence that prove that argument. So example number 1 could be the Holodomor. Example number 2 could be the Holocaust. Example number 3 could be, I don't know, Nanking, whatever evidence that you want to talk about. And at the end of your argument, you want to clinch it. You want to bring it together. Thusly, it becomes obvious the source is correct in its assertion that blah, blah, blah. always link your clincher back to your source. And at least once in each argument, you want to quote the source, and I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. Part two, the body is made up of three separate arguments. Argument number one with three examples, argument number two with three examples, argument number three with three examples. And they all follow the same formula. Topic sentence, evidence explained with logic and reason. It's not enough just to put the evidence on the paper. You've got to explain the evidence in relation to your argument and your thesis. So you're not just dumping the evidence on the paper. You need to explain it rationally and logically to the reader. You know, the Holocaust in Nazi Germany demonstrates, how nationalism can go too far and percolate into ultranationalism, resulting in mass murder. That's what I mean by explaining things with logic and reason. Part two is the body of your position paper. Each argument should be a separate paragraph, and you can have more, but you want to separate each argument with at least one paragraph. So if I'm going to write this very straightforward and directly, argument one's my intro, argument two is my first paragraph two is my first body paragraph, paragraph three is my second body paragraph, paragraph four is my third body paragraph, my fifth and final paragraph is my conclusion. And I'm just going to revisit my thesis. I'm going to quickly review my three main arguments and maybe leave the reader with something to think about, um, keep in their mind for a while. So at minimum, this whole paper needs to be 5 paragraphs. Of course, it can be more. Good position paper, grade 11, should be about 3 pages long, single spaced in the 12-point font. Any less, and I'm not sure you're getting enough evidence and explaining it properly in your paper. Okay. This is the source for the position paper that I'm assigning you to work on this week. Digital copy can be found on D2L. I'm going to put all of the position paper stuff for related issue 2 on D2L under content just after chapter 10. I'm going to call it a separate folder called position paper tutorial, and you'll find all of this stuff in there as well. But there's the source that you're going to react to, that you're going to interpret and develop your position paper on. Our position is extremely perilous. If we do not earnestly promote nationalism and weld together our people into a strong nation, we face a tragedy, the loss of our country and the destruction of our race. To ward off this danger, we must espouse nationalism and employ the national spirit to save the country. A lot going on in that source. I'm sure we'd all agree. So what you're going to have to do is highlight, interpret, and figure out what that source is really saying. Let's go to this now. So there again is your source, and I wanted to do this on the smartboard just to so I can interact with you a bit and get you off to a good start. All right, so if I was to interpret the source, I would be, well, what does he mean by extremely perilous? That's got to mean something. What could that be? Is the nation facing a crisis? If so, what kind of a crisis could be the nation be facing? Could it be economic? Is it political? What does he mean by their position is perilous? That's something I would be expanding on. To move on, earnestly promote nationalism. Well, when you earnestly promote something, it means you're really promoting it. So to me, he's talking about extreme nationalism, which, as we've learned, is turning into what we call ultra nationalism. So when I read it, I almost see a call to ultra nationalism. And then he goes on to talk about welding their people together in a strong nation. What could that look like? What is the tragedy that they face? How could that look? Destruction of their race, that is a pretty powerful way of putting it. I think this is a key integral concept to espouse nationalism. And again, later on, employ the national spirit. So I'm not going to interpret the whole thing for you, but you're going to want to spend some time in the intro quoting things in quotation marks and saying, this is really insinuating this. This really means this. That is part of the interpretation. That is how you earn marks in the introduction of your position paper. So you'll have to interpret that source, and then you've got to take a position of your own. Like, do you agree with that source? Do you agree with what he's saying? Do you disagree with what he's saying? Or are you kind of in between? Be thinking about the spectrums that we've developed. So you've already done and turned in your ultranationalism spectrum, and you've got evidence and examples that go underneath that, and that's fine. As I'm talking about this, you are currently supposed to be working on your nationalism spectrum. So what you're basically going to do is this spectrum will kind of come over here, but then you've got to build a perspective, a spectrum on just plain old nationalism, citizenship, fraternity, and so on. I gave you those headings earlier on this week. And so that menu will serve as your evidence and maybe what position you want to take. So that source, if we go back to it again, this guy is promoting extreme nationalism. This guy is promoting ultra nationalism. So this guy is in favor of an ultra nationalist foreign policy. Based on historical evidence, do you think that he's right or do you think that he's wrong? Should we pursue ultra nationalism or should we put the brakes on and not pursue it? Or maybe there's something in between that we could pursue. You're basically responding to the spectrum. If you completely agree with the guy and you want to pursue ultranationalism, you are in favor of this. You're in favor of the ultranationalism and that part of the spectrum. If you are against what he's saying, you might say, no, we got to promote nationalism and no more than that. Maybe there's something in between that we could talk about. To go on a little further, this might make your thesis even more clear now. When you get a source like the one we just looked at, there are three responses, perspectives that you can take. One extreme is you can say, yep, the guy's completely right. We should embrace ultranationalism. Or you can say, nope, the guy's completely wrong. We shouldn't pursue ultranationalism. Or maybe one of moderation. Maybe you say, that source is correct, but only to a certain point. And that would be fine too. So the thesis can be one of complete agreement. It can be one of complete disagreement. It can be one of moderation, a little of both. The source is partly correct in blah, blah, blah. And here are some possible starts to your thesis at the bottom. History's proven that the source is correct in concluding that blah, blah, blah. So this guy agrees with the source. Based on historical evidence, it becomes clear the perspective indicated by the source is wrong. This guy is disagreeing with the source. The source is only partly correct when it assumes that blah, blah, blah. This guy is kind of agreeing with the source, and that's fine. Nowhere do you see the words I, me, or we. We're not going to use personal pronouns in our position paper. We want to avoid doing that. So your first step is to read that source. You need to interpret it. And then you've got to decide, where do you sit? What perspective do you want to take? And then you're going to take that perspective and defend it. And that is your thesis in the position paper. I hope we're good with all of this stuff so far. Topic sentences. These are some possibilities. These are examples of topic sentences. Upon examination of Gerb and Lebensraum in the interwar years, it becomes clear that expansionist policies are destabilizing and catastrophic. That would be a good topic sentence or an argument. That is something provable. Number two, genocide is an extreme result of ultranationalism. Um, Effective in demonstrating the dangers of ultranationalism. So this guy would be using genocide as a cautionary tale of ultranationalism. We need to be careful how far we pursue ultranationalism because it could percolate into genocide. That is something provable. The main topic of that argument is genocide, and I would need to think of three examples of genocides, and I can: the Holocaust, the Holodomor, maybe Nanking. Topic sentence number three, when used in moderate amounts, nationalism may help oppressed people gain sovereignty and citizenship. All right, well, that could be a good argument too. That's something that I can prove. Sovereignty and citizenship. I can maybe use the French Revolution. I could maybe use the American Revolution. I could maybe use the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the Declaration of Independence. Any of those would work. as examples of this topic sentence. Finally, number four, history has proven that when taken too far, nationalism will lead to conflict and war. Again, that's something provable. I could use World War I, I could use World War II, any number of things, evidence that I could apply to that argument. One note that we should make, you don't want the topic sentence to be too specific. So if your topic sentence starts with something really specific, that's all you can really argue about. So if your topic sentence starts with, I don't know, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, all you can really talk about in the argument is the Declaration of the Rights of Man, because that was your argument, that was your topic sentence. So I would generalize the Declaration of the Rights of Man into perhaps citizenship, and then you can talk about the Declaration and other things that might the Napoleonic Code that would exemplify citizenship. That's my suggestion to you. A topic sentence should not be really specific. Here, finally, I'll give you this. You're supposed to be working on this, and that's fine. I wanted you to give it a shot. You needed to try this to see what you could make of it. But here is the nationalism spectrum. I think you did a pretty good job with the left side with ultranationalism. I think you know the examples of total war, you understand genocide, you've got examples of that, internment we just studied last week, and for sure expansionism. To me, when I look at the spectrum, the black bolded headings could be arguments. To me, expansionism is an argument. Internment is an argument. Genocide, total war could be arguments unto themselves. And then conversely, on the right-hand side, this one you might have had trouble with because this is stuff that we learned back in February. I understand if you forgot. But nationalism spectrum can refer to ultranationalism and then just plain old garden variety nationalism. And so again, fraternity identity, that could be an argument. There are some positives. There are some good things that go with nationalism. It's not all bad. The Boston Tea Party, the tennis court oath, those were things that brought people together in the name of something good, a solid, just cause. The tennis court oath, the Third Estate vowed to remain together till they made France a democracy. That is a good, noble uh, undertaking. That's a positive thing. We want some nationalism. Otherwise, what are we really? We don't really belong to anything. Fraternity identity could be an argument. Citizenship is a good thing. That could be an argument too. Sovereignty could be an argument in favor of nationalism. And so this also might help you with your response to the source. If we go back to that source now, where is it here? Okay, so this guy's promoting nationalism. He's actually promoting ultranationalism. Your response might be, well, yeah, we should promote nationalism to a degree, because with a degree of nationalism, within moderate levels, we would get these good things. But if we go too far and all we pursue is ultranationalism, then we're going to have these bad things. So you need three arguments total. So if you wanted to kind of agree with that source, you might defend two good things about nationalism and attack it with one bad thing about ultranationalism. Or you might attack the source with two bad things about ultranationalism and one good thing about nationalism. That would be for your moderate response. That'd be for your response that's kind of in the middle. If you completely disagree with that source, well, you can build it much the same way, I guess. But that spectrum gives you 7 arguments. And all you really need to do now is configure them to either support the source, attack the source, or agree with the source in moderation at least. You're not going to write down all of this evidence. So if this is an argument, I only want 3 examples of that argument. And you pick which 3 you want to use to support your argument. If I was going to use citizenship, I'm not going to use all of these examples. You only need 3. So you might pick maybe the top 3. I'll leave that up to you. If you were going to explore total war as an argument, I guess you could use all 3 of these examples to attack total war, or maybe you want to defend it. That is completely your call. I really hope this spectrum helps you. That is the way you need to look at social studies. Blank page. Not sure why that's in there. All right. So there's your source. There's the rubric. So you can see the argumentation is out of 8, evidence is out of 8, communication out of 8 for a total of 30. So on the position paper, communication is actually worth a lot, and that is spelling, grammar, your writing, your syntax, and so on. If I was to pick a weakness for grade 11s, it's usually evidence. Their evidence usually isn't specific enough. It's usually very general and straightforward. So if you're giving how many people died in the Holocaust and you're giving specifics, that moves your markup in the evidence category. So to get an 8 out of 8 for evidence, you're bringing more than just generalizations to the table. If I told you that a lot of people died in the Holocaust, that is a very general statement. But if I told you that 11 million people died in the Holocaust, now my evidence is getting specific. I still need to explain it. I've still got to use it capably, but at least it's specific rather than being general. Argumentation is how well you explain your evidence. And you might want to have this with you as you're writing your position paper. You have your overview, 5 paragraphs at least. Last thing I'll show you is a sample position paper. And again, this will be on D2L under the position paper tutorial. Different source, mind you. So different source for this paper, but it's in the same vein as we're doing. And this would have been a paper that got an excellent mark. So there's the first paragraph. There's the introduction. I really like it. I like how they quote the source and talk about what that statement really means. Um, it's obvious they know what they're talking about. Really good job at interpreting the source. They do a good job at exploring it. They talk about how someone might support this source. They talk about how someone might attack this source. Finally, here's their thesis. And I like it. Thesis is clear, it's direct. I know exactly what that person's going to talk about in the paper. Introduction, first body paragraph. So this guy is going to talk about expansionism from what I can see here. So there's topic sentence number 1. They're building an argument around expansionism to attack the source. So if we go back to our evidence, our spectrum, they're going to use this argument in their first paragraph. And again, you can see some specific details. The cost of the war, how many people died. They've got some specifics regarding Japanese expansionism. Good specific evidence that has been explained well, logically and rationally. I'd like you to note, here's this person's clincher. I said we'd be talking about clinchers, and here we go. Here's a really good clinching statement. So they kind of summarize that argument one more time, and I really like the way they quoted the source as part of their clincher. You want to quote that source at least once in every argument. Really like the way they did that. Second argument, looks like they're going to talk about genocide now. So argument number 2 is centered around the concept of genocide. So they're pulling from this part of the spectrum for argument number 2. Again, I see some details. I've got some exact numbers. I've got years. I've got more people. That's what we're after. And again, very good clinching statement that one more time quotes directly the source, so there can be no room for doubt what they're trying to say. And then finally, in the third argument, it looks like they're going to talk about, positive. Okay. So this time they're going to talk about the positive effects of nationalism. In particular, they're going to go after sovereignty and citizenship. So now they're going over here on the spectrum, sovereignty and citizenship. Again, I see some specifics. I see some people. I see some dates. I see some numbers. And one more time, really good clinching statement where they kind of bring it all back together. And again, they're quoting specifically the source. Finally, there's their conclusion. I'm okay with that. Doesn't need to be a big deal. Do the conclusion last, obviously. It's not a huge thing, but it gives you one last chance at explaining yourself, at persuading the reader. And that is the art of position paper writing. You're trying to persuade the reader. You're trying to get them to agree with what you have to say. So please email me if you've got any questions. I'll have the due date on the D2L calendar. I'll send a couple of announcements out to remind you as well. One more time, here is your source. That's what you need to interpret and either support or attack in your position paper. All of this, again, including the source, will be under D2L content. Um, it'll be in a folder called Position Paper Tutorial, which will be just under Chapter 10. All right, so I hope you have an idea of what you need to do. The next year it'll be really important. You'll be doing this on the grade 12 diploma. So let's give this a shot now. Please email me if you're not sure. I'm happy to help you. Okay, good luck.